The employer must ensure that the following requirements are in place before any commercial diving training, a diving project or activity takes place. The employer must ensure that the plant and machinery that will be used for any diving operation or training is checked and tested before is used by the diving team. It is designed, manufactured, and maintained in accordance with the Act and applicable regulations, and it is properly used and kept in a safe condition. And the employer must also ensure that the risk assessment is in place before any activity takes place, and that risk assessment must include the following aspects. It must identify the hazards that the divers might be exposed to during the diving activity, and identify also those employees that might be affected by those hazards identified. And the employer must also explain to those employees or persons that might be affected by the hazards, and also analyze and evaluate those hazards, and also prioritize the risks that might be caused by those hazards, so that those risks that are high, they might get an urgent attention. Also, they must have an emergency or evacuation plan in place, so that if there is an emergency that requires them to immediately evacuate the workplace, then they are able to do so. Also, the employer must have a documented medical surveillance program in place for all employees. And also, before the commencement of a commercial diving operation, the employer must ensure that all employees are informed, instructed, and trained regarding the following aspects: the potential hazards and risks to health resulting from the exposure to those hazards and risks, and also the measures that the employer has taken to ensure that the employees are protected against the risks. The employer should also ensure that employees take precautions to protect themselves against those hazards, and to ensure that they are also wearing and using the personal protective equipment supplied to them, and also ensured that the diving operations are controlled in accordance with the latest version of the regulations, the standards, and any relevant code of practice or document that is related to that diving project. When it comes to the diving commercial schools, the registered commercial diving school must have the following in place: have in place an ISO 9001 quality management system that is certified by the South African Bureau of Standards. They must comply with the requirements of the training standards and the code of practice. They must provide the training in the class of divers and supervisors of which they are registered for, and they must provide training within the borders of South Africa. They must possess the necessary material, staff, venue, plant and machinery, and must also comply with the training standards and the regulations. They must also appoint in writing instructors to provide training or assessment. When you do a diving project or activity, there's a team of personnel that is required to conduct that activity. You have a diving supervisor or instructor who must be present at all times at a control point of that project or training, and that person must be directly in control of the diving operation at all times. Then we have commercial divers who will be engaged in that project, who will be conducting the diving, and those divers, they must be under the control and instruction of the supervisor, and they must at all times obey lawful instruction from the supervisor and also instruction that are in the operations manual. Then we have a line attendant who will be tending to the divers that are in water, and that line attendant must also obey lawful instruction given by the supervisor or that are contained in the operations manual. Then we've got a standby diver. A standby diver must be readily dressed and immediately ready to dive to the maximum depth required by that particular commercial diving operation should the need arise. We also have a designated medical practitioner who must, if required in terms of the risk assessment, render medical assistance to the diving team involving all classes of diving operations. In conclusion, we are saying safety of employees in the diving sector is of paramount importance to the department because the diving sector has been identified as one of the high-risk sectors in South Africa. And all diving schools are required to submit their applications to the department for recertification. As I have mentioned previously, that now the certification will be valid for 4 years. So during that period, after we have received the application, the team from the department will conduct the audits at all the diving schools to ensure that they comply with the requirements of the regulations. And audits will be conducted also to all diving contractors who will be registering with the department to ensure that whatever projects they are going to undertake, employees' health and safety will be protected.